Vamos a dar comienzo a esta sexta sesión del Seminario de Salud Mental Global. Retomamos después de las vacaciones de verano con la idea de impulsarlo durante todo este curso académico. Seguidamente voy a darle la palabra a José Carlos, porque os hablará de la próxima intervención, a cargo de quién estará y un poco cuál será la temática. Y seguidamente yo creo que Francisco Ortega es la mejor persona para poder presentar a la conferenciante de hoy. Muchas gracias por vuestra asistencia y por seguir en este seminario que intentamos hacer con ilusión y con muchas ganas. José Carlos, cuando quieras.
Sí, pues bueno, gracias Ángel y también Francisco. Es un placer estar de nuevo aquí. La verdad es que retomamos también con mucha ilusión este ciclo de seminarios de salud mental global. Bueno, solamente comentar que vamos alternando gente o grupos del MARC con ICERS, la realización de estos seminarios. Y nada, el 18 de octubre será el siguiente, donde estamos tratando de que parte de nuestro equipo que está haciendo trabajo de campo en Gabón con comunidades que utilizan iboga. La iboga es una planta africana que tiene un alcaloide que se llama ibogaína, que se utiliza pues como la ayahuasca en Brasil. La iboga se utiliza en algunas partes del África ecuatorial, Guinea y Gabón principalmente. Nos contarán también su experiencia de cómo es utilizada esta planta en el contexto de la medicina tradicional del Buiti, que son como se llaman estas comunidades. Sin más, pues nada, gracias.
Bueno, entonces yo voy a presentar a Ariana. Buenas tardes a todos. Es un placer presentar a Ariana Barazzetti, que es psicóloga clínica y psicoterapeuta. Hizo un doctorado en psicología y en medicina social en la Universidad de Bérgamo y la Universidad de Estado de Río de Janeiro. Era un doctorado en cotutela y yo fui su director de tesis en Brasil. Entonces conozco a Ariana bien y hemos trabajado en algunas cosas juntos, y actualmente es investigadora en psicología dinámica en la Universidad de Bérgamo y también es terapeuta formada en psicoterapia sistémica y relacional en el Centro de Milán de Terapia Familiar. Y bueno, sus intereses están relacionados con la relación entre significados, contextos relacionales, psicopatologías y violencia, psicoterapia, procesos psicoterapios y cambios psicoterapéuticos, y la epistemología de la complejidad, como aparece en ese texto que Ariana ha enviado, y que es un texto que fue enviado para Transcultural Psychiatry y está en proceso de evaluación. Entonces, Ariana, por favor. Placer.
So, I want to start with some basic concepts of systemic and complexity theories. During these past few decades, different research groups conceptualized psychotherapy as a complex, dynamic, and circular process that offers an opportunity to see how dynamic systems emerge and change. Systemic thinking is a loose body of ideas and techniques, organized around the principle that each system is a whole system in its own right, and yet also part of a bigger system. The defined question in systemic research is the same as that in clinical practice. How and why does this system as a whole function as it does? Each system is unique due to variation in personal characteristics and cultural styles. The component parts of a system have constantly shifting boundaries and varying degrees of resistance to change. Systems pass through developmental and non-developmental change that produce stress-affecting components or elements. System structure consists of a descriptive characteristic of a system, the nature of its membership, cultural and ideological style. They are the resources and the perception of the world that shape the way in which the system interacts. System interaction is the hub of the system. The process of interaction among system members determines the rules by which the system is governed. This is the system level of cohesion, its adaptability, and its communication style. These interactions work together to serve each component and collective system needs. The system is not just a collection of individual sort elements. It is a whole larger than the sum of its parts. So we have a delicate balance. A change in the system situation means a change in the total system and can pose problems and challenges for every single member. System is stable, but also is open. Every element is faced with the test of allowing for growth and change while maintaining the integrity of the system. Of course, family is a system. What we can observe as therapists: external and internal family boundaries, family rules, family role organization, power distribution among family members, and, of course, the communication process. If the family is a system and is more than a collection of individuals, the problem, in our vision, is not in the person, but is between persons. So problems like violence dynamic are created by the interaction between family members. Central of this process is the concept of circular causality, based on the idea that we are in a constant feedback loop with the persons in our lives. We call these cybernetic loops. Linear causal explanation trying to find who is at fault or blame. Circular causal explanation try to understand what each person is doing that to sustain the problem and what they can do differently to change the situation. Circular causality problems are created by the behavior of cause to affect events. I make an example. Paul is a 20 years old who gets very hungry at home. His parents have been advised to seek help. In linear explanation, we have Paul has difficulties managing his emotions and has learned that hunger is the only response when he is fed. The problem so is Paul. In circular explanation, Paul gets angry, shouts his dad gets angry, blames Paul's behavior on his wife, he shouts his wife, Paul's mother gets tearful and depressed, Paul gets angry to see his mom depressed, Paul blames his dad, Paul gets angry and shouts at his dad, and it goes round again. The big concept is that reality is construct. There is no truth reality in a social, it is only a social concept, fluid and no fix. We are all in different change, of course, so we have our own perspective of reality. We perceive things differently because we have differently filters. We have inner belief that we believe the same thing, but there is nothing such as a reality. Also, the therapist have a view of what the problem is, and his view determines how he organizes the therapy, who is involved, and what intervention he or she will be doing. One of the most influential authors in systemic therapy is, of course, Gabriel Bateson. He developed an ecosystemic framework within which mind and material substance could be explained. For Bateson, the family is a system with boundaries and is organized into subsystems. The boundary around the family is set apart from the wider social system on which it is one subsystem. The family must be semi-permeable to ensure adaptation and survival. The behavior of each family member and each family subsystem is determined by the pattern of interaction that connects all family members. Each family is in constant interaction with other systems, with circular loops. According to Bateson, it's impossible to separate or put an objective boundaries between each system or between the different levels of observation. In our presentation, two interesting levels through which we can observe the violent dynamics are an exogenous point of view and endogenous one. An exogenous point of view suggests that reaction, violent dynamics, behaviors, and developments of various systems, for example, families, groups, society, can be interpreted in relation to something external to the system, which we might call the context, for example. The main idea behind this point of view is that violent dynamics are the way they are because they react to factors in the external environment of the system. The endogenous view, on the other hand, lends more emphasis to a construction of reality, person-centered. The focus shifts about the internal dynamics of subjects. From this point of view, we must consider violent dynamics inseparable from moral or values, and the person or system considered in two. The traditional system approach to violence makes the following assumption. Violence acts have a functional role in system maintenance. With equal influence, each part of a system actively participates in perpetuating its dysfunctional dynamics. The paradigm of circularity may have a disturbing implication when applied to family situations in which any form of violence takes place, whereas one can acknowledge that many factors may contribute to the behavior of an aggressor. This cannot be a good reason for absolving him or her of direct responsibility for a violent action. What is important to understand here is that even the perception of a violent dynamics is not and never can be objective. But the perception can be valid and valuable when are specified by the structure of the observer in conjunction with what is allowed by the observer interaction with a given context. To understand the several levels with which violent dynamic could be observed, I want to introduce now the Kanun. The customary law of the North Albanian mountains was codified in a statute that is traditionally known as the Kanun. The word Kanun takes from Turkish and originally derived from Greek, simply meaning statute or code of law, and is related to the English word canon. It means rules or decrees of ecclesiastical law. Several codes of customary law existed in Albania, but the best known was the Kanun of Lake Dukagjini. Lake Dukagjini was an historical figure of 15th century. It is doubtful that Lake Dukagjini had any direct connection with the Kanun. It is more likely is that the original name for the code was simply the Kanun of Dukagjini, the name for the mountain region east of Shkroda, and that the figure of Lake Dukagjini somehow go mixed up in the name. The Kanun of Lake Dukagjini was, at any rate, respected primarily in the Sei Dukagjini region, which equate broadly with the mountains with the mountains around Skroda and Shosi, Nikai, and Mertri tribes. It was also known in the Albanian tribes of Western Kosovo. The Kanun was first put to writing by a Franciscan priest, Stephen Jechovi. After studies in Bosnia, Jechovi spent the most active years of his life as a parish priest in northern Albanian mountains. The Kanun of Lake Dukagjini has since been translated into several other languages. Translating it is, as you may imagine, quite a daunting task, and many words were lost or did not correspond to the original meaning. One of the most famous elements of Kanun is its connection with Albanian Jacques Maria. He had blood flooding or vendetta. Blood flooding is, of course, known in Sicily and Calabria, but it casts in its shadow equally upon North Albania. The Kanun did not invent blood flooding. but has sanctioned, justified, and perhaps perpetuated it. It has become an indelible feature in the lives of many of the northern Albanian tribes. Originally, when a murder took place, it became the duty of the male relatives of the deceased to take revenge by killing the murderer. There is nothing unusual about this, but with time, things go out of the hand. The relatives of the killed party now had the right to take three revenge. It says to kill, and male relative of the murderer, even his children, his father, or his distant cousins. Blood revenge was obligatory under Northern Albania customary law. The male relative of a murder victim had no choice but to kill the murderer. He would otherwise be shunned by fellow tradesmen. From the mid-1920s, the Albanian state was gradually able to extend its influence and authority in the northern Albanian mountains, but little was done to repress blood feuding. In the communist period in Albania, from 1944 to 1991, strict measures were, however, taken and blood feuding was repressed in a good measure. But in Western Kosovo, things were different, and the killing continued. In Albania, there are today many families living in fear and trepidation, where the men folk rarely leave home, and where the boys are unable to attend school for fear of being murdered. It is a major social problem in Northern Albania society, and an acute embarrassment to the whole country. Nor does there seem to be an easy solution to the problem. But let us turn to the Kanun itself, and there is much more to it than simply blood feuds. Most of the provisions of the Kanun deal with settling property rights. Under property, I'm referring primarily to the land and to the woman. The Kanun specifically calls woman a sack for carrying things. Whether the sack refers to the hard physical labor woman performs, such as carrying wood, or to the womb or childbirth, I don't know. At any rate, women had very few rights in Northern Albania society. Their only advantage was that they were not subject to feuding. One could shoot any male relative of a murderer, but not his wife, daughter, or mother. This means that women could play an unofficial role in mediating between two sides, but also that they had to do all a farming and herding work out there, because the men could not leave home. Women were at any rate considered property, firstly of their fathers, who could sell them in marriage to the best buyer, secondly of their husbands, and thirdly, upon the death of the husbands, of their sons. There was only one loophole for women waiting self-determination or semblance of freedom. This way to change their gender and become a man. The so-called sworn virgins on Northern Albania are one of the most fascinating phenomena in this culture. If a young woman absolutely refused to get married and had the mercy of parents, she could promise to remain celibate and could then take on a male gender role. These war virgins assume virtually every aspect of the main role in tribal society. They dressed as men, took on men names in most cases, carry guns, smoked, and carry out male work. They were also accepted as men by the other males in the community and could sit and take counsel with them. The phenomenon has a number of possible explanations. Firstly, the categorical refusal of a girl to enter into a prearranged marriage by becoming a snow virgin, the girl would no longer be abrogating the marriage contract and the honor of the family. Secondly, upon the death of her husband, a woman with no son immediately lost what little social status she had. If she did not remarry, she would be returned to her father or forced to work as a servant for the family of her husband. Since the men in northern Albanian society were and are again deeply involved in blood feuding, there was a constant shortage of males. The sworn virgins solved the problem. But is the Kanun still respected today in the 21st century? To an extent, yes, it is. Despite the Albanian penal code, which is applicable throughout Albania, the population of the Northern Highlands is still acutely aware of many of the provision of the Kanun and respects them. However, the Kanun is also widely misused. The perpetrators of many murders nowadays, which are simply plain murders, often defend themselves by claiming that the Kanun forced them to do it. On the other hand, murders take that place within the prerequisite of Kanun often do not respect its provisions. Particularly shocking for Albania is the murder of women, which a century ago was unthinkable. Let's go to see now the clinical case presented in the article. Artemide is a 30-year-old Albanian woman. She has presented herself in therapy in private practice for some problems related to anxiety disorders. During the first meeting, she tells of suffering from several panic attacks. Anxiety becomes particularly strong whenever a man invites her to go out. A paralyzing anxiety has so far prevented her from accepting an invitation. Artemide's family stems from the North Albanian, and it is one of the richest families of the area. The fifth family of Artemide boasts illustrious men, and to date, the surname it brings suggests respect and honor throughout the north of her country of origin. Artemide is the first of three brothers and arrives in Italy in 1999 with all her family. Everyone around her expressed concern about her situation, especially for the fact that at age 30 has not yet chosen a husband, and even for a clear refusal of the woman to speak the language of the country of origin, the Albanian. Artemide begins to ask what makes her different from her peers. What inside her prevents her from having a love relationship? What force compels her to a life in which not only love is denied, but also any feeling and transportation towards the male world except fear, suspicion, and anguish? After a few sessions with the psychotherapy, Artemide is offered to use a thematic apperception test. TAT is a projective test that involves describing ambiguous scenes. The TAT involves showing people a series of picture cards. The woman is asked to tell a story that describes the characteristic representing each card, explain the emotion of the characters, feelings, and thoughts, and highlight to what happened previously and how the story is going to be concluded. Thanks to TAT, Artemide opens up a therapeutic discourse that embraces several aspects of her life. What is most striking about Artemide's stories are two strong contrasts between conflicting polarities. On the one hand, there is a deep sense of respect for the rules. On the other hand, there emerges their violation. On the one hand, a sense of betrayal. On the other hand, a principle of hope. Women are those who revel in her narratives, pass trials, and eventually free themselves from a past of suffering. But there are also women with easy habits, prostitutes, frivolous ones, that pay their action with grave consequence. On the other hand, men are evil, violent, capable of all atrocities. This aspect is present when she is confronted in the cards with male figures. Artemide fears that men can hurt her, can punish her, can betray her. This sense of distrust is present in many stories originating from TRT. No male figure is exempt from sin. Each of them has traits of cruelty, and love relationships are almost synonymous with suffering. In card 4, that is one on the left, a woman tries to convince her boyfriend of the goodness of their relationship, but the man is dirty, cruel, prey to wild instinct. She is beautiful, sweet, perhaps too naive to notice the anger in the eyes of her boyfriend. In the card 30, the other one, Artemide tells two stories. The first concerns sexual violence, while the second story is a narration about incest. What drives Artemide to think that all men are evil? This question led the therapeutic couple to open a discourse that includes the historical situation of the late 1990s, interviewed when the family myths of Artemide and the narratives of Artemide are heartbreaking and disarming. Her memories and lived experience keep secret for a long time in an attempt to eliminate a painful past for a woman, as such as those who lived with her those years. Now can be told. During the communist period, in particular with Oxa, the lands of the most important Albanian family were confiscated and became property of the state. In addition to the land, Artemide's family also lost all the rights and honors it previously possessed. The family home was dismembered, and the government gave the building to some families loyal to the regime that shared the house with Artemide families and cultivated the land previously handed down for generations. Despite the 45 years of communism have caused a sort of mass amnesia in some parts of population, the statistical data show that the ancient tradition do remain the basis of the Albanian regime, surviving the attempt suppression by the regime also. After the collapse of the communist regime, a most bold phase of the use of Kanun opens. The reference to the code is exacerbated, the laws exaggerated, and interpretation changing according to the situation, make the application even more violent than the original one. Confronting with the weakness of ordinary legal system, and in order to prevent the spread of anarchy, the most immediate solution seemed to restore the whole Kanun's tradition, with a context in which morality was affected by the sense of injustice left by the communist regime. Legitimation refers to a use of Kanun whereby Albanian people justify to themselves the action they are taking, pointing to the necessity of restoring a collective identity destroyed first by communist regime. If the communist regime promoted a war against the foreign and Western people, after 19 became a war of all against all, fist, family against family. Artemide remembered her father and relative in this period like soldiers, tried to defend their house and honor. The right-wrong or respective violation dichotomies are often present in Artemide history triggered by the cards. Rules, order, war, life, relationship. In her narration, we sometimes find a controller. For example, in card 5, on the left, we find a police woman intent on checking that the child has done his or her duty. Within a life of strict rules, change can take place only in two ways. In some narratives, this happens as a result of real epiphanies, while in other stories, the change leads to an interesting metamorphosis. Women who seem not to conform to the norm of an ordinary community life become a man. That is, those who have the right to free themselves from the conventions and expressing their desire in a reality that cannot be in the reach of female gender. In card 6, there is a woman who enters the world of the man. The woman of the story wants to possess the rights, freedom, and power of the man world. But to do this, she has to transform herself. Artemide identification with the woman represented in card 6 is directly explained. The woman's hands remind her of a man's one that are strong and vigorous. This suggests to Artemide that the woman here represented will be able to find a way of escape. The discourse stemming from this card will be one of the central themes of Artemide's therapy, concerning a tradition that implies the virgin nut, but which remains implicit in her family discourse and a speakable story that implies an existential transformation. The identification of some situation leads Artemide to re-examine the Kanun by reading a version in the original language, found in paternal home. Artemide begins to interpret it with a critical spirit, integrating the text with her own narratives. She will be able to use her acquired skills at her workplace to support women victims of trafficking coming from Eastern countries. The case of Artemide highlights how not only the direct exposure to a plurality of traumatic events, but also the legacy of a wounded community that has expressed how the disruption of previous systems of social regulation can generate heavy and negative effects on individual mental health. The attempt to ambiguously define violence by attributing its concepts such as a straight individual aggression or power can only lead, if taken separately and as based on absolute conceptual categories, to approximate or insufficient results. Starting from this kind of remarks, we must try to elaborate innovative approaches which consider that a clinical case we examine is not an enigma to be solved, but rather a reality densely populated by many events and singularity. What we must do within a therapy with features broadly similar to those presented here is to start analyzing both the social aspect, in this case above all the Kanun, and the psychological aspect, for example, the trauma, and move towards a more integrated vision of both polarities. In the treatment of patients with this traumatic experience, our epistemological stance is based on a circular logic and on continuous interactions between minds, environments, and complex systems generated by their relationship. Complex feedback loops continuously connect mind to mind, mind to brain, and mind to body in every stage of human existence. Multiple and parallel interaction continually connect every individual with so many other individuals in an ever-changing world. Each item of interaction works according to intrinsic dynamics on direct time scale. A circular perspective looks for a model where the parts of the system are inseparable from the whole. Every moment, every interaction, every relationship produces holistic information. In the clinical case of Artemide, when we analyze the effects of Kanun on Albanian victims, like our patient, we can and must grasp the violence that this code carries in itself. Of course, Artemide is a victim that presents a trauma derived from a violent society system and its laws. Her elegant is to be a woman in a masculine and patriarchal cultural system. But a victim cannot exist alone. And this cannot explain where or who is the responsible of this violence. She is embedded with the dynamic and fluid system of social and ecological forces. Kanun, at the same, appears as a system of rules meant to contribute to maintain the equilibrium of Albanian society. After this brief presentation, I would like to ask you some questions to stimulate the discussion. Are we able to recognize an unequivocal starting point of violence? Who are the victims and aggressors in Artemide clinical case? Can you recognize several levels of observation in this clinical case, and which are they? Can you recognize the different interpretation of violence from different sciences and knowledge? Yes.
People can make questions in English, Spanish, or Italian, so feel free.
Well, I have some comments. Well, first of all, thank you for your excellent talk, Arianna. I think it's fascinating the systemic approach in psychotherapy, and doesn't exist a dialogue with anthropology, and this is strange for me because, but this is strange in general because Bateson, as you know, was a prominent anthropologist with his huge ethnography Naven about the Yatmul in Papua New Guinea, and but there is no dialogue between anthropology and the systemic approach. And for this reason, I have some questions, comments about it.
Yes.
Yes, the first is, what do you think about this concept from Bateson, schismogenesis? I don't know how to say in English, schismogenesis, because it's a Greek word.
Schismogenesis too.
Yeah, sorry?
In Italian is a schismogenesis, so I understand.
Because what do you think about this idea of complementary schismogenesis and symmetrical? I don't remember the names, but it was something like this. Maybe if you can use this to understand the Albanian case or the Albanian relationships. The second is about because why not use a concept, an anthropological concept such as reciprocity? Reciprocity we used to talk about the non-market relations, more related to give exchange, where a return is eventually expected, is the gift, the relation related to the give. And the third is that maybe you know the literature about the Mediterranean anthropology or not, because there are some excellent works, and specifically the book by John Davis about the people of the Mediterranean, which is a comparison between different societies in the Mediterranean area, and he talked about specifically about honor, about what is the position of the woman in these societies. And this comparison is excellent. It's a reference very well known in anthropology for talk about Mediterranean societies. So I have these are three comments about what do you think about schismogenesis if you consider the concept of reciprocity, this idea of give exchange to understand and to put in relation with the systemic concepts, because I think they have some similarities, or you can enrich in both directions. And the third is about this ethnographies about Mediterranean societies, because for us it's a very well-known reference in relation to the role of women in these communities, and the importance of honor, and what the woman, as you know, embodied this idea of honor. There is a moral dimension embodied in this position, which is very suggestive in order to research about it. So what do you think about these 3 points?
Okay.
Sorry if maybe I don't have an order. There are some suggestions, some ideas that I was thinking about when I was hearing you.
Okay, yes, I think that schismogenesis is a fundamental concept in violent dynamic. I use the concept of Gregory Bateson, of course, in Naven, for example, in the study of population of Nueva Guinea, specifically for the escalation, the symmetrical escalation. Okay. There is another famous clinical case in my research speak about a murder, because, for example, in the Albanian culture, not only more than someone is considered loss of honor, but also show a gun or knife to another is considered a guilt. And so when this reciprocity take place, the Kanun, so the law of Kanun say that to take an equilibrium for the system, it's to take the blood of other family, and so stop the faida or vendetta.
Yeah, but vendetta sometimes, as you know, is related to negative reciprocity. Is when reciprocity is collapsed, emerge negative reciprocity, which is vendetta, which is well, there's different names in different societies to talk about it. For example, in Amazonian cultures, in my field work, among the Kulina of Mediajurua, they talk about the manako, the negative and the positive manako. The positive manako is reciprocity, the negative is vendetta, is what happens when this balance doesn't exist, because there is an event that changed everything in the society. So
yes,
I was thinking more in negative reciprocity.
So I think that in systemic theories, we call this positive feedback and negative feedback.
Okay.
Because I try to explain. Negative feedback is that answer that not amplify the response of a system. So stop the violence, for example. And the positive feedback amplify the answer. So is a symmetric schismogenesis in Beitsu.
Understood.
We have also, I think that we have also to understand that the position of observer in this case. Because for example, in a therapeutic session, the therapist is in the system. So you have a particular view and he's involved in the process. Maybe when we observe as anthropologists the context and the other. Okay. Another good concept is, in this case, is the mimetic theory by René Girard. And I think that we could use in to explain violent dynamic. Or from Bataille, another good author in this case.
Yes, sure.
Ariana, don't you want to comment in the other 2 points? Reciprocity and so, or you just think you...
I don't... non ho sentito l'ultima domanda.
No, the last one was about the book, the John Davis book about Mediterranean societies. Maybe if you know this book, because it's a very well-known book in anthropology. It's a compilation of different Mediterranean societies in relation to kinship and also to the role of woman in these communities. the title, I was searching the title because I have a version, I have the Spanish edition, but in English it's People of the Mediterranean. And maybe with a subtitle, then I can check it for you. Because I understand that you have a background in psychology, a systemic approach, and also in sociology, but there are I think they are very interesting. It's just a suggestion, interesting literature in anthropology about these issues that you are talking about, because one of my early um, interest was to put in relation systemic approach with anthropology, because there is no literature, not important literature about it, and I think this is a mine. It would be a mine for you if you can to put in relation, in dialogue, concepts such as reciprocity, for example, with a systemic approach, because it's fascinating the way you can give light to some microprocesses into the family, and also, of course, meso and macro processes involved in the life of communities, especially in the Mediterranean communities. So it was such a suggestion about it. I think this book is it's a nice book and a very interesting book in order to understand the Mediterranean societies.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know this book, but thank you for your suggestion. I think that the link with anthropology and psychology is a very interesting link, and it's a fundamental link, because we are whole a little world. All family have a different culture, and for my approach, for systemic approach, this is one of the fundamental point, most important point. There is, of course, several psychological psychotherapy approach. And some approach take instruments or to do therapy in the same way. In systemic approach, all clients or patient and each family have a particular role that we have to study, to observe, to understand before take any decision. And so, for example, when I meet first the Albanian patient, I know nothing about their culture. But I remember an exam in university of anthropological culture, and in this book there is a little paragraph about Kanun. And then I ask to this family if they know Kanun, and we start the therapy process from this point. In Italy, there are many anthropologists that is used and famous in psychological field. Also, I thought about Ernesto De Martino, that studies the culture of Switzerland and the Italian migration in the north, for example. Or Michele Risso, it's another anthropologist that study Italian culture. For example, in Puglia, it's very interesting, the concept of Taranta, that it's a concept that is a dance in on a hand, and it's also a pathology of people like schizophrenic or and so on. So I think that anthropological study is fundamental for psychology in this way. I know several anthropology that I use in my therapy.
Can I say something related to that? Because I have I mean, I have somehow. I mean, I know many people in Italy and some people of the family therapy in Milan, the Milan approach, and I know that they also deal with anthropology and etc. Because I have I think the opposed inverted observation of the better feeling than Angel, because I remember reading Cristiana Giordano's book Migrants in Translation, which is a book she makes an ethnography in Torino at the Franz Fanon Clinic, which is similar to the ethnopsychiatry, Tobin Tan French approach, and etc. Yeah. And I have a feeling, I mean, when reading this book, and Christiana is also, I think, critical to these things, I have the impression that, you know, that let's say, individual symptoms were reduced to cultural affiliations. And that is the way to the cure. And I think, I mean, and I have some difficulties with that, because that is exactly the same criticism that people do to the cultural competency framework. You know, that they're reduced. You can reduce, like here, we could say, well, all the malaise, no, all the symptoms of Artemide has to do with Kanun. You know, when we introduce her, when she is full aware that her hatred to men and distrust and etc. has to do with this traditional way of vendetta and etc. She probably will get better and improve and live well. Well, we don't talk about cure, because that's, you don't have that in at least in psychoanalysis. So that is my idea, how to balance these two elements, because because you said that at the end, you know, when you was explaining in the conclusion, you know, when you was saying what is expected from systemic approach and you know, and these two, between these two walls, you know, the cultural and the psychological, the individual psychological, or if there is not individual, intrafamily, you know, intrafamily problem of Artemide and the traditional wall of Albanian Kanun, etc., moral code. But, you know, how to avoid, I mean, because to reduce all this, I mean, all these sort of symptoms, problems, whatever, that in the case Artemide had to this code, to this traditional code, to this cultural affiliation. Is there a danger in that? Because it could be the other way as psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis would interpret all as a you know, as a personal psychological problem. Here, no. Here we go back to culture. But how to avoid to stereotype, you know, to make an stereotype?
I think that first of all, we have to define cultural. What is cultural? What is culture? And this is the first problem, because there is not a univoc definition of culture. For Gregory Bateson, for example, culture is in my mind, in my body, in my table, and in material thing that I can use. For other philosophers, culture can put a distinction between bios and technique. In my view, that it's not, I don't know if it's my point of view or is a systemic point of view, I don't know. But I think that I never view people as only cultural symptoms. But I need to take in my mind also the cultural point. So Artemide, of course, have anxiety. And anxiety is a disorder, a psychological disorder with panic attack, with some dysfunctional behavior, and so go on. But there is Artemide with her conscience, with her relation, with her family, and there is the cultural context of Albania and there is Artemide in Italy, and there is Artemide in relation with me, so with in a therapeutic context. There is Artemide in relation with a man, and with her culture, and with a mixed culture, Italian and Albanian culture. And so there is another culture that we have, another level that we have taken in consideration. So in my work, I never say, oh, you are Albanian, so you follow the Kanun, and so go on. And I never say, oh, you come from Palermo, or come from Spain, or come from... But I try to understand what for Artemide is Kanun, and what for me is Kanun, and what for Artemide's mother is Kanun. And I think that this is the complexity of a therapy, of systemic therapy. Levels, and each levels have a singular importance. Tobin Nathan was criticized about some authors for what you say, Francisco. I know.
No, that was my question. My question was not about you. I mean, I'm sure that you have this balance between these two levels. Is there a risk in the same thing? I mean, in the same way that I think sometimes ethnopsychiatry, etc., has this risk. You know, when they talk, especially with migrants, because they say, okay, migrants, you know, they are alienated from their culture in northern Italy or in Paris and etc. And you know, the therapeutic setting is a place where the culture will reenact it.
Yes.
And as a consequence, people would feel better. I have two objections to that. First, that you reduce an individual to his, her culture. Second, that some cultures are very oppressive, especially against women. You know what happened now in Iran? You know, there were demonstrations, people were killed because some woman wasn't wearing the hijab correctly. You know, imagine a therapeutic setting when you reenact this horrible situation in Torino or some other place. That's what I said. That's to provoke the discussion. You know, your answer was
no. But I know, and it's a very important point. But I think that there is the same problem with I don't know, a woman psychotherapist and a man if is a patient. I think that we have the same problem in the case of gay or different religion, as you say, or if I'm blonde, you are not blonde, and so go on. Bateson said that all information are a difference. So this is the reality.
For example, after Bateson, you don't have a main author or book about the systemic approach and anthropology. In psychoanalysis and anthropology, you have the psychiatry, the psychoanalysis with some figures, some people that you mentioned, the Verreau, Tobin Nathan, Laplantine, etc. But there is not a main work about this dialogue between systemic approach and anthropology, and I think it's important because I agree with Francisco in terms that one of the problems or the risk of to manage culture in clinical settings is stereotyping symptoms. For example, for me, I understand culture as dynamic. Culture is always dynamic, and it's hybrid. There is a porosity in culture. There is not such thing as such a closed system. Culture is not a closed system; it's an open system, and in relationship with other cultures, of course. You know? And it's like a context, like a dynamic context. We need to understand symptoms and narratives, and to understand, for example, what Kleiman says, that what is important for the person, what is at stake for this person, being a woman, being a man, being what, reciprocity, honor, what is important for this person. But the risk is this I already know what you are like, because I have here I have the cultural and competence or competency book, and they say that if you are from Albania or you are from Italy or you are from a specific culture, you are like this, and this is the problem. And but for this problem, for this risk, I think that we have a tool, and this tool is the ethnographic point of view, the ethnographic point of view, the ethnographic perspective, because the ethnographic perspective means that you are relativizando, to put in relative terms what is going on, what is happening. And this point of view means, I think also, it's like a guarantee to not to have a strong position of wisdom, of knowledge in the clinical setting, to avoid this idea that I already know what you are like because I don't know anything. I am trying to discover what's going on, what is important for you. Well, this is my point of view about it. The problem with synthetically, the problem with cultural competence is not to use this tool, which is ethnography, the ethnographic perspective, in order to guarantee a correct interpretation of the illness narrative, or the narrative of this person, which is the patient, who is a patient. Sorry.
Of course, I think that the therapists have to take a position. It's impossible to be neutral or have no premises and etc. I have an idea on the illness. I have an idea on a patient. I have a diagnosis on a patient, of course. But systemic therapy is not a strong therapy. We not impose our thought. We not say to people, you have to do this. You have or you have this problem. For us, the reality is in the eye of the observer. So there is a main reality. I can give you my vision, my observation, my explanation of a problem. You can see your story, your explanation, and then we can mix up this. We can take another way, take another vision, that it could be most complete, for example. But there is not an answer that tell the truth of a fact.
Are there any other questions?
It's a nice dialogue about it.
Yes.
That's an issue.
It's really interesting. I found here a paper. I was looking if there's an article on anthropology and family therapy, and I found this one, I don't know if it's good, but they say that normally the difficulties of the dialogue is the idea, you know, the two poles, the family universality on the one hand and cultural relativism on the other.
Yeah.
And the article seems to be good because it argues, well, these positions are undefensible. The idea is how to navigate between these two ideas, no?
Yeah, because apparently the systemic approach is very close to anthropological perspective, because it's different than in psychoanalysis. In psychoanalysis, what the problem is in the inconscious is inside the subject, the subjectivity. It's not in the, they don't manage an idea of relational subjectivity.
Yes.
Or not is important for psychoanalysis, but for systemic approaches, this is the way to understand what's going on, the behavior, the symptoms, the narratives, the feelings of the people in terms of processes of a structure, of a vision of the world, for example. When we compare, for example, these ideas, the structure, process, and vision of the world, used in a systemic approach, this is compared with social structure, with history, and with culture in its ideological definition, more the idea of values, expected values, religion, beliefs, etc. And for this one, I think that there is a nice, an excellent way to in this intersection. But I didn't find, of course, there are literature about it, but there is not a main author, a main book, or different books central to this intersection. And this, you find this when we are talking about the intersection between anthropology and psychoanalysis, and not with the systemic approach.
Yeah, because but maybe the difference is that between psychoanalysis and anthropology is very much has to do with the relationship between Lacan and Lévi-Strauss, no, and the whole structuralism debate, which very.
But you find it in the Cultural and Personality School, for example, in the 30s in the United States. Margaret Mead, Ralph Linton, Abraham Carlin.
Yeah, Margaret Mead was married with Gregory Bateson.
Yeah.
Was his second wife.
Yeah.
No, he was his second husband. Sorry.
But I think that the Milan approach is also a bit different, maybe because they also work with migrants and things like that. They may be probably open to psychological, to anthropological insights, even if they don't have theorized or they don't have published, or this idea that if you don't publish in English, then nobody will read you, and etc. But it's really interesting.
Not only anthropology is in systemic approach, there is also other science like biology. For example, Maturana and Varela, it's two authors very important for a systemic approach. Or sometimes math or language and so on. The concept is that the epistemology of complexity promotes the interdisciplinarity. So we started to the idea that all science can be helpful for the therapy and for the study of human being.
Yeah, that is very different from the reductionism of psychoanalysis.
Yes.
So, Angel, you want to say something, or we?
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you very much, Ariana. It was great, very interesting. It's recorded, so we will put the link in our website, so we can also send it to you, and you can just diffuse among your colleagues, but also other people will see it that are not here today, and maybe also send you some questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay.